Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another video. As you can tell from up there, it is my first impressions of the latest Kaiju film by an American studio, Kong Skull Island. This is a film that's been rumored for years. First heard about it, I think, around 2010. And of course, back then, speculation was it was going to be a sequel or spiritual sequel or somehow spin-off of the Peter Jackson Kong film. And of course, my reaction was, alright. Alright, let me turn that off real quick. And I was thinking, like, alright, could be decent, could be whatever. And of course, years passed, and I'm like, they're probably not going to make it. It's probably gone into quote unquote developmental hell. And of course, when stuff like that happens, usually one of two things happen. Either the film ends up not being made, or it is made years later, and it's usually mixed reactions. The film that comes to mind that is the best definition of that would be Freddy vs. Jason. I know there's some people that don't like it, some people think it's meh. I fall into the camp more if I like it. I mean, the main human characters aren't the best in that film, but it's what you would expect when these two horror icons were to meet, and it is a lot better than the other script ideas they had. Now, some of the other ones would have been interesting, but probably in the so bad it's good way, where you're just sitting there in the theater eating popcorn, waiting for the train wreck to go. You're like, Now, the only other thing that comes into developmental hell is something I'll probably be touching on at the end of this video, but that's neither here nor there. Now, those of you who don't know, Kong has a long history with me personally. I mean, I think I've mentioned it in many reviews before that I grew up watching a lot of older films, not just films, films in the 90s, because I'm, raised in the 90s, so I'm going to be watching films like Waterworld, the Batman films that are made then, the Phantom, which I actually did see in theaters. Actually, at the theater, I'm seeing Kong at tonight, because as I'm recording this part, I haven't gone in and seen it. I would move the camera about, but I don't want to get it off the stand I have it recorded on, because in case anyone's wondering, I'm recording this one on my phone. That's why the video isn't such good quality, and it looks the way it does, as opposed to the webcam I normally would record my face videos with. Anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked with that, sorry. Now, older films, which was mainly, it would depend, for my standpoint, older ones would be films made in the 80s before I was born, like The Fly and The Fly 2, mainly The Fly 2, but by older I mean like 30s to 50s, like the Wax Museum film with Vincent Price. I did see that as a kid. James Whale's Frankenstein film, which is a personal favorite of mine. I didn't see The Bride of Frankenstein until later. There's probably a lot more I'm forgetting, but, I don't have an absolute memory back then, but there are ones that stayed with me. And one of them was the original 1933, I believe, King Kong. There's just something about that film that has always stuck with me. I think it's how the stop-motion effects were realized in the film back then. They were groundbreaking. You watch the film today still, and you're like, man, these effects are pretty kick-ass. And then you find out how they did it, and it's like, ooh, that's pretty cool. I mean, the DVD that I have, there's a 7-part documentary that goes into the making of the film, which I haven't watched yet. I know, stupid me, I haven't watched it yet. But from what I hear, it does go into great detail on it. And the film did inspire generations of filmmakers, including Peter Jackson, who, of course, made the '05 film, which I'll touch on in just a moment. Then, of course, as a kid, I also saw the 70s remake, which I did enjoy, too. I mean, I've gone back and forth on whether I like the 33 or the 70s version better. And right now, I'd say I probably like the 70s version second, just by a tad. I'll say probably the romance in the first remake's a little bit better, but I think overall more impactful is the 30s one. But they both do represent the decades they were made in, not only the time period, but also how they utilize the special effects. And the 70s one, just like what the 30s one showed that stop motion could be used effectively, the 70s one showed that pseudomation can be used effectively. And it's probably one of the best examples of a film, especially in the 70s, bringing a kaiju monster to life with a suit. Because it blows all the Godzilla films that were made at that time out of the water. No contest. I don't think the Godzilla films had a suit that could even compete until the late 80s, early 90s when they were in the Heisei series. And probably even then you could debate maybe the Millennium series, but because that Kong suit they used then, you could tell it's a suit, kind of, but it is still amazing to look at, especially the close-up shots. And of course the acting by Jeff Bridges as the male lead, he did an excellent job in that one. Now the sequel, it's another one of those ones I would say is in the older films. I only remember seeing like once or twice through its entirety as a kid, and I remember bits and pieces of it, like Kong dying at the end, his son living on, and then the mate. That's about it that I remember. I mean, I haven't revisited it since then, so that might be an interesting video of, a retrospective rewatch. I don't know, maybe I'll come up with a new series title for it, like childhood favorites probably wouldn't be it. It'd probably be something like, I'll come up with it later. I'll probably insert it in the description box once I'm done. We're almost 6 minutes in and I haven't even seen the movie yet. Then we get to the Peter Jackson movie, which I did not see in theaters, but I saw when it came out on DVD. And I got the DVD for Christmas as a gift for Easter the following year. I watched it, and one thing I remember about it is the film it's the last film I watched with my grandma Vi in the last Easter we shared before she passed away. So that's why that movie sticks in my mind there, because we watched so many movies together. I mean, we saw many movies here together at this theater. We saw Waterworld here. We saw The Phantom here. We saw... I don't remember if she was with us or not, but I know my dad was with me. I saw Batman Forever here, so theater I'm seeing this movie at tonight, and a lot of big connections there. And of course, the last movie I saw in theaters we saw here, and that was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. End of an era that film was, so that's why that film always will have a special place in my heart. I know I'm getting a little sentimental now, but no, with this type of topic, I can't really help it. But that's the reason why the '05 film sticks a little in my mind. But there was just always something about it that, and I couldn't really pop it in like I could the other films. And I haven't revisited it since, actually. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I just haven't watched it in its entirety. Although since then I have gotten the extended cut, but that's one of those films that you look at and go, really, this needed an extended cut? Because that's one thing I remember, is that the film was a little overly long. Took a little bit too long to get to the main point. Now, some people might say that about the 70s one, but at least the 70s one was paced better. And by the time you actually saw Kong, it was worth it. Now, not to say that this '05 remake didn't have any good scenes. I mean, that fight with the T-Rexes, that was a pretty badass scene and showed off the technical sophistication that CGI had at that point. And of course, CGI has come a long way since then, but I still am one of those people that prefer something when it's actually in front of the camera. But when CGI is done great, I will admit it is done great. It's just like stop motion. When it's done great, it's done great. Although I still have the preference for stop motion because you're actually animating something in front of the camera, so it still has that little vibe about it. And like with something that's hairy, you don't have to animate the hair, come up with a program for that, because you have the hair on it, so it has that little touch that gives it a little bit more of a charm feel. But that's a rant for another topic, and I just have to bring it in there. Anyway, that's why I haven't revisited it yet, but probably sometime this year I might revisit it. Because I do plan on doing a Mar Talks video for the original Kong and possibly the 70s remake, but who knows, maybe I might do one for the '05 one. The Toho films, not really, maybe Escapes. I only watched it once and wasn't really a big fan of it, but who knows. Now, King Kong vs. Godzilla, that's another one that made my childhood. I can't believe I almost skipped out on that one, but I already have a couple videos on the channel about it. It was a film I heard about once I had gone from Kong to Godzilla and was becoming a fan of that Kaiju. And I heard about it, and I'm like, well, I must watch this. It took forever to track down a copy of it, though, because the video store I would go to, Couch Club Video, they had a lot of Godzilla films, which is how I moved through the series. And I actually, when that store closed, I ended up buying a couple of them, which is how I had those in my collection. But he did not have King Kong vs. Godzilla. So I had to wait and wait. It was never on TV. They would show all the Godzilla movies on TV, but this one was never on TV. Then one day when me and my grandmother were at Walmart, what do they have? King Kong vs. Godzilla. The American version by Universal, but the film nonetheless. So what do? We get it. I watch it. I enjoy the film. I now have it on DVD, and of course I also have a rip of the Japanese version, which is why I've been able to compare the two. I'd say I probably prefer the Japanese version by a mile, which is why I'm still annoyed that it hasn't been released on DVD officially. But, what can you do? So as you can see, Kong, as well as Godzilla, have been a big part of my childhood, and which is why when I heard this film was finally made, I'm like, well, this should be interesting. Especially since apparently it's supposed to be set in the same universe as Legendary's Godzilla film, which I know a lot of my friends were not the biggest fan of it, which I can understand. I mean, time has gone by, and I've thought a little bit more about the film, and I haven't rewatched it. But probably when I get home from watching this, I might pop it in and rewatch it. But I still enjoy it, despite its flaws. And from what I hear, what we're gonna get in the next couple years, the rematch of the Millennium, Kong versus Godzilla Part 2. Well, it's technically a Part 2 in a sense. It's the second time they've made it, but it's not. It's only a rematch for the fans, basically. But it's going to be this Kong that I'm about to go see versus Legendary's Godzilla, and boy, that will be a monster mash. Anyway, I'm about 10 minutes in, so next time you see me, it's going to be a segue cut, and it'll probably be a lot darker out here. You probably won't be able to see my beautiful mug as easily as you can now, but here we go. We're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're back, everyone. If you noticed, it is darker like I predicted. Wondering why the light on my face is a little weird. It's not because I'm underneath a headlight. It's because I have the light here on, because see what happens if I don't have it on. It feels like I'm in a thriller. So I'm going to let me try the other end real quick. Okay, that one's a little... I'll try that one. Now, before I get into the review part of this video, I'm going to say I enjoyed the film. I had a feeling that I was going to end up enjoying it based on the trailer and word of mouth I've heard. Or read, I should say. Facebook word of mouth. And it was a fun time. Is it as culturally significant as the original? No. Is it as much of a drama piece as the 2 remakes? No. It does have its dramatic moments, I will say. But it is an entertaining ride. It is a popcorn film. It's basically what some of the older Godzilla films were. It's a popcorn giant monster movie. And it definitely looks like they're like what I thought with the last film, Godzilla from 2014, what they were going for. They're trying to go for the entertainment value of the Showa era films in a more, I hate to use this word in a film involving giant monsters, in a more realistic manner, as in portraying the creatures as more creatures, maybe a couple little humanistic tendencies, but, still animals. And also probably a little bit more of a scientific explanation. I mean, they're going with the whole inner Earth creature thing, so that's what I mean by scientific explanation. And of course, not as over the top as the Showa era, especially the later to mid Godzilla ones. I mean, Godzilla flying through the air using his atomic breath. Do I have to say more to describe over the top? No, I don't. Now, the film stars Tom Hiddleston, Samuel L. Jackson, Brie Larson, John C. Reilly, John Goodman, among others. Those are just the main ones. And the acting in the film is actually pretty good. Now, a lot of the characters aren't written as deeply as I thought they would be, but that was an initial thought, but then the word of mouth told me, all right. But they're written deep enough for this type of film, and the acting sells it. Like, some characters are going to be written more deeply than others. There's not really a lot you need to know about them. It's set during the Vietnam War, the very end of it. So, with that in mind, you could kind of guess how a lot of these characters are feeling. More so the soldier characters, mainly the privates, and I think one of them might have been a corporal. I definitely saw a sergeant rank at one point, but I think he died pretty early on. Based on the hell they've been through, you can imagine what must be going through their mind when they're in this environment, especially after, is that a giant monkey? Which actually did get a minor laugh from me, like I thought it would. You could just imagine what's going through their mind. And there's a couple small scenes, like one of the soldiers was writing a letter home to his son, and later when he's been killed and they find the notebook he's been writing in, there's a little dramatic moment there. And of course, Sam Jackson's character, we don't know his backstory other than he's a decorated lieutenant colonel, but his performance alone sells home the fact that this guy's seen some shit. He's gone through from some shell shock. The beginning of the film, he kind of comes off to me as kind of a Captain Willard from Apocalypse Now. I had a little brain fart there. From Apocalypse Now vibe. Going through it all and wants another mission with the war being over. he just cannot believe that they're going home. It's like, oh, I can't do my job. And when he hears that they have another mission for him, he jumps at the chance. He's like, yes, General, sir, I'll take this mission. But by the end, he's kind of turned into Captain Ahab because he wants to kill Kong at the cost of everything else. And I'm not going to really say anything else about it, but that Ahab comparison goes a step further with his ultimate fate. And if you know anything about what happens to Captain Ahab, you kind of know what I'm hinting at. That's all I'm going to say about it. And he actually does almost get to say motherfucker in this film. I'll say that. It's cut off, but I'm not going to say why and how. Now, like with Winter Soldier, there's a couple scenes where he does an implied motherfucker just with his face. You know, that whole meme involving Sam Jackson that stares motherfuckerly, taking that scene from Pulp Fiction. He's all like looking like stares motherfuckerly. Someone should take a screenshot of him from this film when it comes out on video and put that on that stares motherfuckerly. And of course, with Sam Jackson, in a film like this, you kind of know what type of performance you're getting from him. Over the top, but dramatic and intense. And that's what we get from Sam Jackson in this film. John Goodman, he's what you would expect him to be in a film like this. And his character is the closest this film has to a Carl Denham-esque character. But it's totally different. He works for Monarch, which is a group that tracks down giant monsters. But at this point in the timeline, because this is technically a prequel to the 2014 Godzilla film, in essence, it doesn't lead into the events of the film, but it's a prequel in the sense that it takes place in the same universe before the events of that film. And they actually loosely mention the bombings that, in this universe, the atomic tests that weren't tests, they were trying to kill Godzilla. They mention them in this film. And I guess Monarch, at this point, is looked at as a fringe group. I mean, at the beginning, his character is trying to get funding from a senator, and the senator is doing his best to try to avoid meeting him, and then he's forced to. Gives him a 5-minute meeting, is like, all right, I'll let you guys do it. But it's the last chance. And of course, with what happens here, the events of this film basically show how some of the government groups in Godzilla, mainly the one that I'm guessing Ken Watanebe's character, sorry if I mispronounced that, his character is doing business with, and why the government actually takes giant monsters seriously, even though since this is after the bombings they should, but you know, maybe they view Godzilla as a one-off. Now, Brie Larson's character, she is an anti-war photographer, and of course, if you know anything about the Vietnam War, you could see why her character would be kind of looked down a little bit by some of the military personnel, but it's not like they carry that into an arc. But it's a little subtext thing that you mainly get at the beginning when she's introduced to the military guys. But throughout the film, she's mainly taking pictures of what they see. I mean, some of the events that happen with the initial contact with Kong, when they meet the group of villagers, and as they're going on throughout the film. And she and Tom Hiddleston have an interesting chemistry. They don't do the whole forced romance thing to the point where it's like they kiss and all that. But they have a chemistry, and there is a little sub thing involving their characters that it's like, okay, I could see them after the event of this film hooking up, and they are there in the post-credit sequence. But there's nothing said about them having a relationship, which I think works for the film. The closest that we get to seeing something like that is something involving the character of Kong, because unlike the 05 film where, you know, he has moments of humor where he laughs and then he broods, he's mostly brooding in this film, and that's because he's the last of his kind, like most other interpretations of Kong, except for the 70s remake, where the sequel shows that he's not the last. And there's one scene where he's like looking at both of them, and you could tell with how they animated Kong's face, what's going through his head. He's like, look, put it in this term, he's like, you're a lucky man. And then he turns around and walks away. We actually do see the bones of Kong's parents in this film, which when I saw that, I'm like, ooh, that's a little ominous. Let it do an action scene involving them, which I thought was an interesting one. But it's like seeing their bones is like, ooh, I wonder how they died. It's a little... John C. Reilly's character, he does a pretty good job acting-wise. At the beginning, you do really see how crazy he's gotten on the island. Stir crazy, I should say, because he's not like that one character from Predators played by Lawrence Fishburne, where you can actually tell that he's starting to, you know, be a little crazy from being alone, but then he does the thing where he tries to kill everyone. He doesn't go that far. He just, you know, you can tell he's a little kooky. Like, and one thing they mentioned just that he mentions, is that he has a tendency sometimes to think when he's thinking to say it out loud instead of keeping it in his mind, which I can relate with. I mean, there's times where I'm thinking where I actually say it out loud, usually softly. I do this a lot when I'm writing, by the way, but that's usually just to make, because I like to freestyle out loud, or like sitting there typing like, blah 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 blah. No, scratch that. It's just the way I write. But with him, it's like, ooh, could you imagine that? Not having an inner monologue because you don't want to go stir crazy. And of course, he has some funny little lines, like later on when his group meets up with Sam Jackson's group, which they do have a nice little moment there of one military generation to another meeting up. Is like, they do a little salute thing there, like, okay, I'm glad they put that in. But he's like, I've only been on the island for 28 years, what do I know? And there's a couple other lines in there that stood out to me that I can't remember off the top of my head, because I've only seen the film once, obviously, but they stood out to me. And if you haven't seen the film yet and you watch it, you'll probably understand which ones I'm talking about. One of them was about war, and if you have seen the film, you probably know which lines I'm talking about. There was listen to them, like, those are good lines. And of course, his character does get a happy ending. Out of all the leads that survive, he's the one that gets the confirmed happy ending. And it's at the beginning of the credits, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a nice little ending. And of course, with how the film begins, with his character landing on the island with a Japanese soldier, which, by the way, explains why he has the katana in the trailer. Because when I heard about in the trailer he has a katana, I was thinking, okay, where's this going to come from? Then I heard he's supposed to be a World War II soldier stuck on there. I'm like, okay, that explains it a little bit. But then now seeing that he actually is stuck on the island with a Japanese soldier, it's like, makes a little bit more sense. Though, the sword he's stuck on the island with does look a little bit better than the ones I think they would have issued to soldiers during the war, but who knows, maybe he comes from a rich family. That's just my guess. Could just be a blunder, but could make it perfectly reasonable. Maybe it's a family sword, I don't know. Doesn't have a doesn't have the cross guard thing on it too, I noticed, but and again, neither did Oren Ishii in Kill Bill, but that's more fantasy. Well, then again, this is fantasy too, but you know what I mean. That's more exploitation fantasy, whereas at least that part of the film, it's a war drama thing. And of course, I do like that they mention off screen, in between the main part of the film and the prologue, that Reilly's character did become friends with the Japanese soldier. They didn't just kill each other. And of course, they have a little respect for one another, which is mainly sold through Reilly's performance when he's talking about his fallen comrade, especially the scene where he's by his grave saying, we said we wouldn't leave each other behind. Of course, he has to leave his friend behind, but he at least takes the sword. So I guess if he ever did make it to Japan, he could tell his family, your son was a good man. Now, the directing, I don't have the director's name offhand, and I'd have to actually pause this in order to look up the director's name, so I will probably put that in either the video now or I'll just mention it in the description box. Whichever is easier. He does a good job directing. He frames his shots pretty well. I like how the use of color. It's not muted, but it's not like overly bright to the level of being cartoonish, but it's bright enough that it sells the point and is believable. And I like his use of long shots, medium shots, and close-ups. And I especially love his point of view shots at points. And like there's this one where the one character that comes in with John Goodman he's holding a rifle and he turns. I like that shot. What stands out about it is that when he turns, the character that's approaching is Tom Hiddleston's character. He's not fully in focus at first, but then focus is quick enough that it'd be like if you actually were turning and saw me, like, oh, it's just you. So that little attention to detail I loved about this. And I think maybe it's the fact that I'm actually studying this little minute details like that in a film class right now. Maybe that's why it's standing out to me more as I'm watching this film. But it was a nice little attention to detail there. And of course, the animation on Kong is magnificent. I mean, I always prefer a practical effect over a CGI effect. But as CGI gets better and better, the big budget films that use it, the CGI is going to look a lot better. We might be getting closer to the day where CGI does have the charm that practicals do. I mean, it's a lot more convenient than practicals for certain things, but I'm always going to be a practical over CGI guy. But Kong looked pretty good. And there were a couple moments where he did look very realistic. Like there's a scene where he's holding the Larson character in his hand, and it actually did look like a real hand, a real ape hand. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. They actually did animate that very well. And of course, the monster fight scenes Kong's involved with are pretty good. There's one involving an octopus squid creature that, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's definitely a tribute to the octopus fight in King Kong versus Godzilla. Well played, directors and writers, well played. Then the fight with the main baddie definitely seemed like a tribute to the classic T-Rex fights from the original and the second remake. And it was its own thing, too. And of course, the look of the main antagonist monster. It's semi-original while being a throwback to some of the older reptilian designs. And definitely comes off a lot better than the Mutos from the Legendary Pictures Godzilla film. Which tells me Legendary Pictures has learned a little bit, which that's another thing with the characters, is that they're written about the same in depth the same way as the characters from the Godzilla one, but the difference is we care about them a bit more. I mean, the one out of the Legendary Pictures films that people cared about the most was Bryan Cranston's character, and then when he's killed off, some people got pissed, and then some people lost, their emotional development. No, not development. Dang it, I hate it when I forget the right word. They weren't as emotionally engaged, there it is, as they were with him. And I think part of that was the marketing, that it made it seem like Cranston was going to be in the whole film, and then it's like they pulled a Nightmare on Elm Street with us, make it seem like someone's going to be the main character, and then it's not. And sometimes when they do that, it works, like Nightmare. Sometimes it's annoying, like Godzilla. Even though I did not mind the characters that took over, they just weren't as engaging. Here, the marketing made it clear there's like multiple people who are the protagonists, so when certain ones get knocked off, it's not the moment like, kill off my character, will you? It's more like, he's another one gone. Which leads into another thing. The use of period music in this film was pretty good. We hear a couple tracks that, that's kind of mandatory to hear in any film set around the end of the Vietnam War. And then we haven't had a 40s piece at the very end of the film. And I'm like, that is a pretty good use of that song. Mainly because it's Reilly's character that leads into it, and then it plays over the rest of the scene. And then, of course, there's an after-credits scene, which I'm not going to spoil the contents of in this video, but it is definitely going to lead into the next films, and it does hint at more kaiju. The only one I'm going to spoil is Godzilla, and that's because we've already seen him in a film, but it does spoil some of the characters that I did want to see with him. One of them is, of course, the most obvious one when they're going with the underground creature angle. But with her, it makes me wonder if they're going to have a new backstory for her, or if they're going to try to incorporate her past backstory, but like modify it slightly to fit this angle. Like, is she going to be the protector of the Earth, like how she was in the Heisei series? Because if they're going to go with any angle, I think that'd be the best one. Now, overall, this is a very entertaining film. The characters are written at the appropriate level they should be for the type of entertainment level they're going for. I mean, it would have been nice to have a little bit more depth on the main ones, but we know enough and have enough that we like them and we want to see them actually make it off the island. And of course, with Sam Jackson, you could tell as the film's going on, like, okay, he's going to be the human antagonist, which he is. Kong, he's likable like he is in most films involving him. Because I can't really think of any of the Kong films where I hated Kong. I mean, King Kong versus Godzilla, he was basically the superhero of the film. The original one might be the only one, but that's because I think that's mainly because we didn't know as much about gorillas then as we did in the 70s and even in 2005, where we incorporated a little bit more made him a little bit more less of a monster and more of an ape. Humanized him, I guess you could say. Though he does have a little bit of that in the original, just not as much as the later ones. And, great effects. The acting, like I said, was pretty good. The original score, I don't really remember a lot of the notes, but it fit the scenes it was in. Set design, amazing. Special effects, like I said, great. Definitely comes with my recommendation if you are a fan of kaiju films and you are on the fence of whether to watch it. It is definitely, without a doubt, a 3.5 out of 5 star level film, and that's my rating for the film. If you are definitely on the fence because of what Legendary Pictures did with the Godzilla reboot, I say put that little hesitation aside and go watch it. This is definitely a funner theater experience overall than that film. I still like that Godzilla film. It's just that the main selling point for that, once Cranston's character bit the dust, is the monster fights. But with this one, definitely a funner theater experience. And I definitely look forward to the next Legendary Pictures Kaiju film.